Well, another Monday is here. I got a little short video here for you today. This is another one of those interesting stumps I ran into that I didn't expect. And, it was one that nobody really knew what to do about it. But first I'm going to talk a little bit leading into this about CV axles and stuff. You know, a lot of you guys probably know all you need to know about those and U-joints and everything, but I'm going to cover some basics here. CV axles are called constant velocity joints because if you've ever used one of these universal joints on a long extension and you've bent it too sharp, you know how it, you know, sort of warbles with you and it goes slower and faster and slower and faster, but as it, you know, crosses its little lines of respect and all. But the one that we use on impact wrenches for that reason are this kind of CV joint. That is actually a constant velocity joint that you use to drive your sockets. And that's just a necessity. When you're going to bend it sharp, you still need to apply torque. Well, that's the same sort of thing you're looking at with CV axles on vehicles. Now, the inner CV axle joint plunges to allow the axle to get longer and shorter with the suspension movement. The outer one, which is what you see right here, is actually going to bend and you know, and continue to apply torque very smoothly without getting hard and easy like these other kind of, you know, plain old U-joints and everything. So anyway, I'm going to move on to my next slide here. Now listen to this. Take the air off for about 10 minutes. Okay.
You think it'll be over here in this book and that?
That inner CV joint had failed and it was causing the whole drivetrain to shift back and forth when the wheels were turning. Now, inner CV joints don't usually fail, but they can. This one right here is the CV joint we had to replace that one with, or one like it anyway, for the 2000 Monte Carlo. But you might notice how it's made so that these rollers, they can plunge in and out of this deep bucket thing here. That's just the way that's put together.
Move it one way,
now,
see? You want to move the other way? Can you get it move the other way? It won't move the other way. It's all locked up in it. It's just plumb seized up. Try to move it the other way. Are you off enough? Can you move it? You ain't moving. That's it. Nothing with that. You couldn't move it.
You can see how that was stiff one way but not the other, and that causes all sorts of wacky driveline vibrations. And sometimes whenever you've got a bad U-joint, it'll click when you're going forward and squeak when you're going backward or something like that. There are times whenever you may have a failing universal joint of the sort you see here, and the only way you can detect it is to remove the drive shaft and feel of it, because you may not even see anything just looking at it. Sometimes you can look at it and tell, but there are other times when you cannot, and you just have to pull the drive shaft out and feel of the joints and look at them really close and all that. You don't have to take it apart, but if you can wiggle wobble those things around and they move smoothly in every direction, they don't have play, and they hadn't dried out. Now, you know, the ones that come in a lot of the drive shafts for years didn't have, or the ones that came out OEM did not have grease fittings. So when you replaced it, the one that you replaced it with from the parts store typically came with a grease fitting. And the deal was, when you were replacing that thing, and I've replaced them in parking lots with a 4x4 and a hammer and a drift and a screwdriver. I drove to Houston one time when I was living down in Port Arthur, and I replaced a couple of U-joints for a lady that we knew over there. But they don't cost that much. They're usually about $18 or $20, and if you know how to replace one, it's not a big. Now, I will tell you, some of the ones on Chevy pickups have to be heated up with a torch to get them out of there, and the reason for that is they seal those things in there with molten plastic They don't use retainer clips on some of the OEM, older OEM Chevrolet stuff, and we've actually had to heat those things with a torch to make that plastic run out of there so we could replace the U-joints. So they're, you may run into that if you're working on an old Chevy when you pull the drive shaft off. Not all of those things are that easy to replace, and you can't beat those out of there with a hammer when they're sealed in there with that stupid hard plastic. And about the only thing I know of that'll get them out of there is heat. But you might want to notice that on the replacement joints, see this one here has got the cap will have a inside slide, and it's got to go far enough in here so that you can put that clip on the inside of that boss. This one here goes in far enough so that the clip will fit on the outside, and the clip looks like this. You've seen those. And you can basically put a screwdriver under one side of that thing and whack it, and it'll just practically jump out of there, and you can put it back in pretty much the same way. But the joint has got to be pushed in there far enough for that clip to go in, and if one of those needles falls down, students have a tendency, when they're applying force, if what they're wanting to happen doesn't happen, they just keep applying force. And this guy broke this vise whenever he was trying to replace a U-joint using the vise for a press. A lot of us have done that. You know, use your little press. I mean, I have actually held the thing though and just beat the old one out of there with a hammer, bam, 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 take the clips out of it. And after you've done a few of them, they're kind of fun. But the long and the short of it is, he wasn't familiar with the fact that if one of the clips falls down, you won't get that cap to press all the way on there. And he just kept on applying pressure. He may have got a cheater pipe after this thing, I don't know. But he broke that vise. That turned out to be the weakest point. And but that's, students break things sometimes, and that's just the way that was. And anyway, that was wild and crazy. You can also use a ball joint tool, which is like a big C-clamp, I wouldn't use a regular C-clamp, although you probably could if you did it, so, but the ball joint tool works really well for this. And and a press obviously works well too, but you can do it with a hammer and a drift, except on those Chevys they have the U-joint cap sealed in there with that stupid plastic, Now CV axle torque steer, I was driving a Ford Escort one time. The only Ford Escort I ever saw that had a came factory with a turbocharger on it. Little pancake-sized turbocharger, no bigger than your hand. And I opened the hood and I was looking at it. And this was a pretty neat little ride, The grill was sort of smoke blacked out and all that kind of stuff. And I can't remember why I was working on it, but when I drove an Escort, I drove it a certain way, and whenever I kicked that thing into, when I was driving that thing and I took off on it, got out onto the highway with it, as I remember, I had hit second gear and I gave it a pretty good bit of throttle to gain speed in second gear. And that turbocharger light, the little green light that came on that said you were getting turbo boost, came on that little Escort. And that thing jerked the wheel out of my hand with torque steer and scared the daylights out of me. It felt like a rocket. So I was thinking, you're not expecting that if you've been driving Escorts every day, and I had at the time because I was a mechanic at the dealership. But what they did, the longer shaft will twist a little bit on acceleration, which makes the shorter shaft, the wheel driven by the shorter shaft, try to go faster, just long enough to where it kind of pulls the wheel in your hand. Well, they came up with a fix for that by adding this shaft right here. This shaft right here goes in there, and then it's locked into it's sort of like a jack shaft. It's bolted to the block, there's a bearing there. And so the end of it is you've got both of these axles are about the same length, and that eliminates torque steer. Now, you might notice if you're using an impact wrench and you've got a long extension and you put it on a real tight bolt, you will not move that real tight bolt with that long extension, because you may not be able to because of the torque being used. It's like the torque sticks when you're putting lug nuts on. It twists just enough to where you don't get the benefit of all your torque. That's the same principle going on here. And if you take the long extension off and put the impact wrench either on a really short extension or right on the socket, it'll snatch it out of there when it wouldn't move it with the long one. I discovered that way back in 1975 when I was trying to pull the transmission out of a big truck up in Montana. Anyway, So, but they added that shaft for that reason, and so the torque steer is something that, you know, isn't talked about a whole lot, but there's all kinds of stuff you can read about it online. Now the CV axle torque steer is, some systems are, some of them are configured like this one here, and you've probably seen some like this, so that the transaxle is made specifically to enable them to use the same size axle on both sides, and those kind don't ever have torque steer, which is pretty smart. But you'll see them like this, and that's why some of them have got that extra axle piece and some of them don't. Well, when an outer CV joint wears out, it'll make clicking noise during tight turns, and usually it'll be because the boot has been compromised and dirt will get in there, and it makes a dandy grinding compound that causes the little ball to waller out dimples in the paths where it runs, like you see right here. And so that's something, if you see torn boots, there was time whenever in the early days of CV joints, what we would do was take them apart, clean them up, inspect them, and replace them. Replace the boots. Now, the way that some of the Renault, Renault, if you want to say that, CV axles were configured, they had the little, there was a thing kind of like this on the end of the shaft. I can't do it with my fingers right. And in order to replace that boot, they had a set of fastigiated rods. It looked kind of like a metal teepee, and you put that thing on that over the end of that axle shaft where that big knuckle thing was. It wouldn't come off, and you would put some motor oil on that axle shaft thing, on that fastigiated rod teepee thing, and slide that thing up there, and it would stretch it out, and then it would snap back down around the axle. It was the craziest thing I'd ever seen. They also make some other tools, for stretching those. In other words, they make air-operated tools that you can stretch CV axle boots and put them over there, and you can actually repack them with grease and all that. But anyway, that's pretty important. But CV axle only cost about $60 now for the whole axle, and they're making brand new ones, so they don't even require you to give them the old one back. And I had a whole lot of CV joints laying around from old axles, and I would have my students take them apart and put them back together just so they know how to do that, But anyway, usually a torn boot will be the reason that the thing's clicking. If you just keep driving it, eventually it'll get worn out enough to where the balls will just fall out of it, and you'll wind up with no way to go. I've actually seen that happen too. But this customer came to us with her husband's 2012 Camry, and she says, Joe hears noises when he's turning. The Toyota shop says it's a CV axle. Well, okay, so it's a CV axle, so why didn't you get it fixed at the Toyota shop? Well, the Toyota's dealer says it's going to cost $560, and I think that was just for the part, plus the labor to put it in there. It was going to be super expensive, and she kind of was hoping to dodge having such a huge repair bill. Incidentally, I took my and I don't know how much oil changes cost in your area, but around here, the fair going rate for an oil change is between $60 and $70 if you're using some synthetic blend oil, like the Motorcraft synthetic blend. Well, there's a guy that's got a bunch of shops in this area, and he's a nice guy, and I've known the guy for a long time. But all of his shops are super expensive and cost more than any other shop. I figured that I would just take my, to honor his business, since I know the guy. I went over there with my Explorer to get the oil changed, and initially when that guy, they tried to sell me a tire rotation. I said, no, I don't need that. They tried to sell me an air filter. I said, I can still see through it. I don't need that. I can change my air filter. I don't need you guys putting an air filter in there. And so when they got through with this, I used the Motorcraft synthetic blend, which is what I like to use in my Fords, and a Motorcraft filter. And they was wanting $103 to change the oil. I mean that's what after I got the oil change done, I didn't ask what it was going to cost beforehand like a dummy. And so I says, well, I'm going to go ahead and pay for this because I got the money, but I'm never going to get another oil change done here if you're charging $100 for an oil change. This is ridiculous. And I said, the last time I got it done at a tire store, it's between $60 and $70. You're overcharging. And he said, well, this oil is expensive now. Well, you can buy 5 quarts of Motorcraft synthetic blend oil at Walmart for $26. This doesn't cost that much. Even at the parts house, I think it's $46 for oil and a filter and all. And they wound up charging me $87. Long and the short of it is, that's not a good place to have your oil changed. And I'm not going to say the name of the shop, but the long and the short of it is, the Ford place, which is right up the street from this place, only charges $62. Think about that. The dealer charges $62 for the same thing these people were trying to charge me $103 for. Get real. Anyhow. So,
And we're listening
we
for
just
a
test drive.
noise. The left front seems to be making a lot of racket. We're going to turn right. This is coming over the speakers. He can turn very slowly. Now turn left. We're turning left. All right. So we're going to turn left again. All right. And we're making that strange sound.
Now, the reason that we could hear it so clearly was because I used this chassis ear, and rather than connecting this to these headphones, I got a cable and connected this directly to the auxiliary port on the customer's radio, so that we could listen to the sound coming from the chassis ear microphones that I had, and we were listening to it over the car speakers. That's why we could hear this so well. Now, you could hear it. It wouldn't have been this clear had we not done that for the purpose of this video, but you could still hear it even without the thing on there. But this chassis ear thing, you can buy one of these from Amazon for about $140. The annoying thing is you got to run your cords and all that kind of stuff. They make a wireless one, which I had one of those too at the college. I never liked that thing. It seemed like it had a lot of interference. You just couldn't tell what you were listening to, and it cost about $500 or $600. This wired one was always a whole lot better. But the long and the short of it is, we had a noise here, and I was thinking, this doesn't sound like a CV joint, because usually when I'm hearing those, I'm hearing click, 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 about like that. But on this one here, it's going, the clicks there were too many clicks. The clicks were too close together. And I was thinking, for some strange reason, I understand why that might be a CV joint, but I've never heard one that clicked with that many. The cadence of the clicks, there was too frequent there. And but so we investigated. We pulled the joint, rolled the boot back, and look at that. The boot was intact. The boot was not busted on this one, but there wasn't enough grease in there. This is a lot less grease than you usually see in a healthy CV joint if you've ever pulled one apart that had an intact boot. Usually this thing is just covered with grease so that you can't even hardly see anything. This one here had that, had worn itself out because there wasn't enough grease in there when they built it. That's the only answer to this, because this vehicle, I think this vehicle might have been coming up on 100,000 miles, but these CV axles are supposed to last the life of the car if the boot's not busted, and typically they will. There's a lot of cars out there that have never needed a CV axle. Of course, it's a fairly common repair, but you're not always going to have one. Okay, the outer joint. See that? I actually made this where I had to click on these and I forgot it. And that's what the CV axle looked like laying up there on the bench. All right. So we disassembled it. We washed it really good. This one has 8 balls rather than 6. That explained the click, 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 the faster cadence, because there was more tracks and more balls in there. And so, but anyway, that was an interesting thing in and of itself. And you can see the little dimple here. See that dimple in the inside part? And then there was a dimple in the outside part. You can see that one too. And so that's what we had. Definitely it was a U-joint. But then the fun begins. This is not the end of the story, believe me. So we ordered a 2012 CV axle for the Toyota from the parts store. It didn't fit. The outer splined end was too big. We ordered another one from a different source, same thing. I even ordered one from Amazon, same thing. It came in with a 30 spline shaft that wouldn't go into the hub. And I'm thinking, what the heck is this all about? And so we needed a 26 spline shaft like this one here, and you can see that this one here is a little smaller than that one. This one here just absolutely would not fit. And so I was thinking, this, you know, I kept arguing with the parts guy about it. He says, well, all I know is to send you the one that our parts book says. I said, well, that may be true, but, you know, it's not fitting. And everybody was having the same issue. Virtually every part store, and I ordered them from multiple part stores and again from Amazon for a 2012 Camry, would not fit. And this was the deal. And so I said, well, what are we going to do now? This is ridiculous. So I says, well, maybe I could change the hub. You suppose maybe I could get a hub that would fit, put it in there, and then I would wind up with the right, with something that would work. I'm scrambling right now trying to figure it out. And so what I did was, I called the Toyota dealer. I got their part number for the hub for this 2012 Camry. I got that Toyota part number. I crossed it over to a Dorman number, and I had the parts store order that one. I says, whenever I get this one in, then it'll work with this shaft. The parts catalog though said that hub fit a 2009 Camry and not a 2012. So I ordered a 2009 Camry CV axle, and it fit the existing hub. So in order to get that 2012 Camry going, I had to order a 2009 CV axle. And it was really incredible to me that everybody was having the same problem with this. Now, this has probably been cleared up now by this time, because this was several years ago. But the fact that, when you order the part from several different, and they're all making the same mistake, there's something wrong. And I kept thinking, am I going to have to buy a $500 or $600 CV axle from Toyota? Well, the one we ordered was about $60. Now, the one I ordered from Amazon, I had to keep it for a trainer part. The college paid for it. And so I left it up there so that you could have a nice new CV axle to show students, we were talking about that. This video hasn't been all that long, but I really appreciate you guys hanging around to listen to my stuff. Put a like on the video, make a comment, share it with some other folks. And, this is the end of the video, and I hope you guys have a great week, and let's all be careful out there.